Hi everyone and welcome back. My name's Anthony Bottibol. I am the Marketing Director at BlueVen. This is the third session of the day. I'm starting to lose count. We had a packed day yesterday and we've still got plenty of content to get through today. For this session here today, we're delighted to welcome one of our newest partners, Throtle. So BlueVen, as a customer data platform, we're all about helping marketeers create a single customer view, or the 360-degree view, as many call it, and help to then use that to orchestrate hyper-targeted customer journeys. Now, Throtle is going to be a key partner for BlueVen in helping to achieve that 360-degree view. Throtle are a data onboarding company and recognized thought leaders in the identity resolution space. And using Throtle's kind of identity resolution solutions, it's really going to help BlueVen's customer data platform users be able to build that 360-degree view and append records with well over 1,500 attributes, including demographic and behavioral data across many connected devices. The CEO, Paul, is with us today. Paul has many achievements, including, and I don't want to embarrass you, Paul, but I've got a few here. So I can see that you've been a Stevie Award winner. You've been the America Business Bronze Award for Executive of the Year, and twice now Smart CEO Future 50 Award winner. So that's fantastic. If you have any questions throughout this session, please do use the GoToWebinar technology to post those to us. I'm going to post, ask those questions to Paul towards the end. All that's left is to say, Paul, it's great to have you, and over to you, Paul.
Great, thanks. So you're going to send me over the...
Yep, just on it. I'm just transferring the connection to you.
Okay.
All looking good?
Yep, I think so. Can everybody see the screen?
Yep, looking good. Thanks.
All righty. So, well, thanks for that, and I appreciate it. As you said, I'm the founder and CEO of Throtle, which is a new entrant into the onboarding and identity resolution space here in the States. And I've been in this business for a long time. I've been doing this for about 25 years in multiple companies built and sold. And for Throtle and for the products and services we're offering today, we identified about 1.5 years, 2 years ago that there was a gap in this space, and that identity resolution for the online ecosystem was going to grow to be a pretty important feature for marketers and brands. So, we entered the space, and the first thing we did when we started building Throtle is build an ID graph. And what is an ID graph? Simply put, an ID graph enables marketers to identify their customers across all channels and all devices, and allows them to record and track all of their actions. And then they use this data for more sharper and more targeted advertising. So, an identity resolution capability is built off the back of an ID graph. And it's a really strategic capability at this point for marketers on the digital side to be able to cross channels, cross devices, and obviously track them across everything that they're doing. So, how did we kind of come to the conclusion that understanding the folks behind their devices, behind their browsers is something that we all need? If you kind of take a look back on the evolution of targeted marketing and direct marketing over the course of the last few decades, you started seeing this back in the 80s, at least here domestically with postal and targeted mailing. It used to be you just used to send any sort of mail piece to a household, and it was basically done by the census. It was done by an address. But as we started getting more and more into targeted marketing, we found out who was in that household and started targeting those mail pieces to the folks within that household, not just to the household, not just to the resident. And then all of a sudden in the 90s, we all started getting email addresses. And in the late 90s, marketers were satisfied with sending offers to an email address that was acquired from a specific site. So if you were on a sports site, Sports Illustrated, for instance, you would get a sports offer or something that was geared to somebody who likes sports. But in the early 2000s, we started appending PII to those emails and started segmenting those emails into audiences that you can send, targeted email campaigns to a specific audience based on, the who behind the email address. Seems like it's, normal stuff today, but back in the early 2000s, that was pretty heavy stuff, trying to get, all the information behind that email address when, the internet was really just starting. And then you start taking a look at display, and about 6 years ago, you didn't just have to buy the run on a site, and you didn't have to buy, ad space on a site. You started the ability to be able to promote a targeted ad to a specific hashed email address that created an anonymous audience. And you really didn't have an idea who was behind that email address. You didn't have an idea who was, in that segment you were targeting. You just happened to know you can start creating a targeted audience based on a hashed email address. PII was taboo back then, and I was in that business. I had one of the largest syndication data companies in the space. We had hundreds of millions of consumers and thousands of segments that we would be syndicated across 150, 200 different platforms. So we knew very closely that the PII behind the device, the PII behind the browser, was stripped away and anonymous. However, about a year and a half ago, marketers wanted and are now demanding the identity of those individuals behind the browser and behind the devices. They want to know who the person is that's viewing an ad on a laptop or on a tablet or on their phone. They want to know their behavioral patterns and who they are and what they do. And all of this is just a maturation of targeted marketing for display ads. So today, our business focuses on providing the who behind the browser, who behind the device, be able to onboard those guys deterministically, create those audiences, and allow brands and marketers the ability to reach those folks. So when you start really looking at, what identity resolution is, it's really the recognition of a customer. And that allows you the ability to connect with them between, all of their interactions online, offline, past, and present. So you're really, by building an identity resolution graph, internally on a brand-by-brand basis, you have the ability now to connect that consumer online and offline and be able to track and compile and measure all of their actions, whether they're, in a store, whether they're purchasing on their phone, whether they're purchasing through, their tablet, whether they're responding to an email address or a postal piece. An identity resolution allows that capability to be tracked on an individual basis. So, how do you build a graph? Quite frankly, on a brand basis, you really don't. What you do is you license a graph from a provider, and then you build a proprietary graph based on the customer data that each brand has. But building an identity graph is not a simple task. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of talent. You have to have a lot of specific data DNA in-house in order to do it properly. And so what Throtle provides and what we're able to do is we're able to build this identity graph domestically that comes from our capabilities in the data space to bring in and ingest dozens and dozens of data sources. And using those data sources, we build a proprietary graph from the ground up, meaning from an individual level up, we build this graph. And most graphs that are available out there today either are non-existent because they're not really a graph, they're a marketing database that people are trying to turn into a graph, or they're built off of a household level, which is basically an improbable way of doing it because you really need to understand all of the movements on an individual basis. So for just a high-level view of how you build it, you take all of these disparate data sources, and through a variety of algorithms and capabilities, you compile all of this data and put it all together. And you go through this compilation process that builds a very validated truth set, if you will. And it's basically the spinal cord of a graph. So you're taking every known individual in the U.S., for our purposes, that are over the age of 18, and we know exactly who they are, and we have all of their likes and dislikes, their demographics, psychographics, behavioral information tied to it. But what turns it into a graph That prior statement was all about marketing database. What turns it into a graph is the association and accumulation of all of the persistent personal IDs that are associated with an individual. We all have them. We all have, a mobile phone, a mobile ID. We have an email address. We have social handles. We have IP addresses associated with our devices. We have, landline phone numbers. We have household addresses. So these are all persistent personal IDs that, from a identity graph perspective, has to be compiled and then accurately associated back to an individual. And once you do this at scale, now you have the ability to do resolution on an individual basis at scale. So, building an identity graph is not a swift task. It takes a lot of time. So from a Throtle perspective, we have a lot of different use cases that people could take our graph and actually in-house our graph and then build their specific identity graph based on their customers using ours as their base. So, and how do you, once you have the ID graph built and once you bring it in-house and you associate all of your customers to the graph, how do you resolve to an identity? And, a sample use case for here in the States, McDonald's gave us a list of email addresses that they have captured off of their online ordering app. So they have an app you can go on there and order and pick up at the McDonald's window using this app, and they've only collected email addresses. But McDonald's challenge is they want to know exactly who those people were. Who were the people ordering from those specific locations? Who were those people that were buying? What were they buying? What the households look like? What was the makeup of the individuals? So from a resolution perspective, they provided us with those emails. And we took those emails and passed them through our graph. We have about 700, 800 million email addresses associated with the individuals in our graph. And by using that match key, we were able to provide them with a deterministic identity and profile, each one of those email addresses that they provided us, which then can be accumulated and put into an audience based on, that particular location. So the McDonald's case, they were able to identify, who was ordering from them, what their households look like, how many kids were in those households, what the income levels of those households, what was the buying radius around those locations. So provided them a lot of information that they didn't already know, and it's used now for them to do marketing around their particular locations. And for the app, they actually found out, the user identity of those apps and started creating a profile of the app user, which is, probably a little different than people that go in the store. Another use case is we have a large outdoor billboard client that wanted to understand who was driving by their billboards on any given day. And as you can imagine, a billboard gets in a heavy traffic area, they get, hundreds of thousands of cars driving by it. They didn't have any clue how to figure out who was in those cars driving by these programmatic billboards. So these are the billboards where you can show, separate ads on. So we engaged with a geolocation provider, so a device provider that is able to identify devices that are driving past that billboard on any specific day. So now we can get a device ID that traveled past that billboard in whatever day part that was required. We took those devices and we passed them through our graph as another match key, matched them to an individual, and then we're able to provide profiles of those travelers traveling past that specific billboard during that specific time frame. So the advertisers now have a better understanding who their ad is being driven to or displayed to, A, and B, gives the outdoor billboard client the ability to sell in a more effective manner their advertising space based on day parts of travelers. So, an identity resolution can do 100 different things. And from a brand perspective, they can now ask for certain information and be able to derive an identity of that consumer across all channels, all devices, in an omni-channel kind of environment. So, there's a lot of use cases from an identity resolution perspective. But specifically, what can it do? As I mentioned before, it really allows you to identify and connect with your consumers in an omni-channel and cross-device manner. And, obviously that allows you to build a proprietary consumer graph. It allows you to collect relevant information from whatever source you may be getting it, online, offline, point of purchase, CRM, whatever location you want to collect data in. You now have the ability to associate that data back to an individual within your graph. one of the most important parts about any graph is assembling a persistent ID. So on an individual basis and household basis, the Throtle graph has a persistent ID associated with it. So in the event of anyone using that data in a digital manner and sending either an offline offer, an online offer, an email, that ID is associated with that particular offer, and whatever response you receive from that consumer can be attributable to that ID, and that ID is also stored in a brand's location as well, so they can actually create that crosswalk between the actions of a consumer in the Throtle ID graph with their CRM file and start working on the attribution, ROI, analytics to really be able to close that loop. So the identity graph gives you that capability of applying a persistent ID and then being able to use that ID to close the loop in all sorts of actions and responses and purchases. So there's two different types of graph. There's a deterministic graph and there's a probabilistic graph. A deterministic graph is simply a known entity versus a probabilistic graph, which is I think it might be the person, it might be the right person, it could be the right person. And the world started, the world of digital advertising from a onboarding perspective started 2011, 2010, and it was highly probabilistic. In fact, it was wholly probabilistic, and a lot of that was also on a household basis. Today, marketers are looking for deterministic matches. They want to make sure that the ads that they're serving up to their customers are going to their customers, not somebody in their household, not somebody they live with, not somebody they think is their customer. They want to know that it's a deterministic graph and a deterministic match. So from a Throtle perspective, that's exactly what we focus on. We focus on an individual and deterministic match, down to the individual level. So we know it's the person, it's validated, it's truth, it's a trusted match, and we match on a one-to-one basis versus, you might have the right person, you should have the right person, looks like the right person. The way we handle scale is, on an individual basis, we have scale, so on any given onboarding project, we can get anywhere between 40 and 65% on an individual level right out of the gate. But, to get even greater scale, once you have a deterministic graph, you can start doing profiles and models and create those lookalike audiences, and that's where you get into, well, I want somebody that looks like my customer, but I want to know that they're not my customer. So this is where you start doing your acquisition and conquest marketing. So connecting the offline world to the online world, once you have a graph is really quite simple. It's all using that ID once you make that connection between the offline data and the online data. So, where you might have a lot of offline data in your CRM system and your existing, customer file, we're able to create an offline ID that matches to an online ID. And now you have the ability to take all of that offline information and leave it into one record with all of their online information. And it just really fills out the identity of that individual. And there's no longer a struggle to say, what kind of device does he have? What kind of online behavior does he have? What kind of information does he have that on an offline basis that we can use and leverage in an online world? So by having an ID graph, that allows you to really connect those two worlds, and it allows you to link all of that offline information with the online information. So, from a graph perspective, the high-level conclusions are, you have a very confident approach to build audience segments that are, used for targeted marketing in an individual and deterministic way. You certainly can enhance all of your first-party information with additional intelligence, and that obviously unifies the data, so you can get a really good 360-degree view of your consumer. It also allows you to increase the accuracy of the marketing that you're doing. So obviously in the prior versions of onboarding, in the first generation onboarding, the confidence that you're reaching 100% of your audience, was not 100%. So your ROI, your accuracy, your attribution analysis, any of your analytics was out of the gate flawed because you're using a data set that's fallible. It's not 100% accurate. So when you're using an identity graph that's deterministic and you're using it the proper way, you have a lot more confidence in the targeting. You actually have now deterministic knowledge of all these people. You have the ability to deterministically understand who your customers are. And obviously, the more deterministic matches and the more comfort you have, the more reliable on the analytics and the attribution you have. So I think from a presentation standpoint, that's our presentation on an identity graph and the use and the capabilities thereof. And if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at this point.
There is indeed, Paul. Yes, thanks for that. So I've got a question here. Where, if any, is there room for error or misconnection?
Yeah, there's always room for error when you're dealing with data that's part of the game. The real effort is providing the data to a graph provider like Throtle in the best way you can. So one of the ways the industry makes huge errors up front is by the provider of an identity graph or an onboarder on not taking a client's data in and first doing all of the processing of the client's data outside anything else. So the process for Throtle is we ingest a client's data, and then what we do is clean their data, standardize their data, hygiene their data, update their data. We look at their data from an addressable standpoint. We look at their emails and make sure they're all accurate. So we do a lot of upfront work on the client's data first before we start putting it into the graph. And then what that does, and enables a really crisp view of the client data into a crisp view of the graph data, and those matches are much stronger and tighter. It's never going to be 100%. And if you ever hear any graph provider say, we're going to match your data 100% accurately, it's an outright, it's impossible. There's any given device has multiple users, right? So if you hand your phone to your friend and say, hey, let's use your Spotify, put your email address and log into your account, I want to hear your music. All of a sudden that device now has 2 email addresses associated with it, from a Spotify perspective. And if Spotify is providing some of that network traffic that we use for matching, we're going to have 2 separate emails associated with a single device. There's no way you can have 100% accuracy. But in a case that I just gave you, we know the predominant use of that particular device is associated with a certain individual just by the amount of times we see that individual in that device with that email address. So recency and frequency on the match side gives us the confidence that we know the person on the graph side. So it's never going to be 100%, but the holes are where enough data work isn't being done up front to associate that data to a validated truth set and graph like Throtle has to ensure that connection is as solid as can possibly be made.
Okay, so one of those initial processes at your end is you do a lot of cleansing and hygiene to get rid of all the bad data.
Yeah, it's a differentiation that we have amongst players here in the States to do that. When providing an identity resolution service, the first thing you have to do is just make sure the data that you're bringing in is as accurate as possible before you start matching it to a truth set or a validation set. Otherwise, you're matching bad data to good data, and the outcome is never favorable.
Yeah, sounds sensible. Okay. I've got another question asking how long it takes to build an identity graph.
Yeah, it takes years to build it at scale like we have. This is not an effort that is built swiftly. First, you have to have all the data inputs. You have to create all those relationships with all the vendors providing specific pieces of data, the nuances of that data. You also have to have the spinal cord established. You have to have everything to put together a graph is very difficult. From a brand perspective, they've got a lot of that work done because they've compiled a customer file. They've built a CRM list. So utilizing a graph that Throtle has built and focused on, that becomes the foundation for a brand, and then they overlay their data on top of that and extract all the values and information that they need to run their business. Despite the fact that we have 250 million individuals, a brand may only have 3 million. So we're going to give them a proprietary graph of of our licensed graph to them, and they'll overlay their 3 million, and that'll become a subset of the larger graph. So in doing that piece, it probably takes about 30 to 60 days, from the time of ingesting the Throtle graph and ingesting it on the brand side. We also do it as a software as a service. We'll take that brand's file in, overlay it on top of our graph, and make that accessible to the brand, so they don't even have to house it or do any of the work. We'll do it on our side. But generally, from a proprietary standpoint, it's about 30 to 60 days to build a graph like we have at scale. It takes a couple of years.
Okay, I've got another question here. What can your identity resolution services add to someone who already has a single customer view?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question. What can our graph do to support somebody who has a single view of their customer?
Yeah, I'm not going to name them, but it is a customer of Blue Ven at the moment. I guess they're interested in finding out what benefits they would get from the Throtle Blue Ven relationship.
Yep. So assuming that they have a very thin view of their customer right now, and a thin view meaning they may have an address, they may have an email address, they may have some purchase history, but they don't have any real information behind who that person is or their household is made up of. The first thing they would receive is a lot more intelligence on that individual, and that intelligence could be used obviously for more smarter marketing, more targeted marketing. They also may not know the devices that individual is using. They might not know how many browsers they're on, how many devices they're on, how many tablets. Mm-hmm. So we'll be able to provide that cross-device capability. So if that person's on the phone, or if that person's on their tablet, or if that person's on their laptop, that person is receiving an email, that person is receiving something in their post box, we'll be able to string all of that together, so all of the channels, will become, sort of consistent, and the messaging being consistent across all the channels. In a pure omni-channel world, that's really what an identity graph does, to provide your clients that has a single view of that customer, the multi-view of that customer, and that customer of yours can now use the Throtle capabilities to reach that customer anywhere the customer happens to be, whatever website they're on, whatever device they're on, whatever channel they're working in. So we kind of open up that single view to a 360 view.
Okay, great. Right, well, thanks very much. I'm just going to take the connection back. Okay, so thank you very much, Paul. I guess ever since I've been in marketing, which is 15 years, we've always been talking about the right message, the right time, the right person. And that hasn't really changed. That's what we're all striving to do: one-to-one marketing, get the right message at the right time to the right person. But then, of course, now it's all about the right device as well. So I think this need to recognize our customers in this sort of multi-device world is very, very important for marketeers and, of course, Blue Ven customers. So I know this relationship is going to really benefit our customers, and particularly, I think there's a very nice tie-in with our real-time personalization modules for linking devices and cookies. So, yeah, really excited by this. And thank you very much for your time, Paul. It's been really great.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so up next, up Join Digital. And I hope you will log back in for the next session. We have Ryan Phelan from Adestra. So they're one of our partners providing email. So Ryan's going to be talking about how we can be putting email back in the boardroom. We also have a separate stream running, which is for customers only, customers and partners. And that is a live Ask the Expert session with our Customer Success Director, Andy Minchell, and our Head of Software Support, Mike Carey, I've seen them putting their session together, and it's looking like it's going to be a good one. So that would be a good one to for customers to go look at as well. Of course, we are going to record all of these, so if you choose one stream and not the other, then we will be have everything on demand next week. So thanks very much for everyone attending. I hope you enjoyed that session, and I hope to see you on another one before the end of the day. Thanks a lot, and goodbye.